Welcome all to the final lesson on specifically the locations and cultures in Jeor'n-Dith. I am Taishi, your instructor, and this is... Today's lesson is focusing on the Rophf, and as it is a smaller location, we will be jumping straight into it with no preamble. Our first topic will be The location of the Rophf is exactly what gives it its name. It is positioned on the northwest coast of East Torren, along with the large archipelago surrounding the coast that is then surrounded by a coral reef. The capital village is on the mainland of the continent, however, each island in the archipelago has its own ecosystem and some even have smaller villages on them. The surrounding water is crystal clear and littered with colorful colonies of coral that glimmer under the reflective surface and give the area a much brighter appearance. The main attraction of this location is the enormous tree growing at the end of the isthmus, affectionately known as the Grandpa Tree by the people of the land. From what I can tell, the tree seems to serve a multitude of purposes, such as an infirmary, a temple, and a living quarters to the two leaders that will be covered later, and the newest, as of current, Warden Dragon, Gukarit, the warden of all raiders, and the first child born in the Rophf. Next, we will move on to the people of the Rophf come from many walks of life and from all around the globe. However, there is one specific group that has called this place home longer than any other. This group is known simply as the Rough Dwarves. Aesthetically, they are near identical to their cave-dwelling counterparts, with the only difference being their clothing, accessory choices, and the Rough Dwarves are significantly more tanned than their reclusive cousins. However, there are more differences in how they have grown in their environments. Where most dwarves are able to see in the darkness better than most others, and rough dwarves are still able to see in the darkness, they are not nearly as proficient as mountain or hill dwarves in this skill. However, to make up for this and to adapt to where they now live, they have become extremely powerful swimmers that can also hold their breath possibly better than any other primarily land-dwelling species. They have also gained a magical ability to resist lightning and thunder because of something that I will talk about at the very end of this lecture, as I feel it deserves to cap it off. But back to the other residents, there is not much to say about them in general, as many different people call this location home. The one thing I can think of is that most tend to shun magic of most kinds. This does not mean that they won't allow people that can use magic in, nor will they discriminate them if they do come in. But they do tend to stick to more martial powers for themselves, aside from the worship of the gods, and more specifically, one god. But once again, that will be covered at the end of this lesson. The next aspect we will cover is the culture of the Rophf is, as stated before, very warrior-focused, while also being incredibly holy and almost monotheistic, as they only have a public temple to one god. As a group that lives along the coast, they live primarily off of fish and other aquatic creatures and plants. The Rophf is predominantly led by two people, along with a council of elders. The two leaders are the Fjord Lord Gallag and Sistrud the Crowned. The two lead for 12-hour intervals, Gallag from midnight to noon, and Sistrud from noon to midnight. While one is leading, the other will sleep or walk around, making sure that everything is going well on a more personal level. The Rophf has a military force much larger than one might expect for a town of their size. However, this does come from their views on martial arts and weapon mastery, so it is understandable. They have also given it a silly name to boost morale, I believe, but I'm not entirely sure. This name is the Mercenaries, a portmanteau of marine and mercenary. From what I've seen while visiting, before going to bed, the people living in the town and surrounding villages will get onto their knees in prayer, all facing towards the Grandpa Tree. And finally, speaking of the Grandpa Tree, we will now move on to the god worshipped there. Thunder Daddy is the god that is primarily worshipped in the Rophf. You may be wondering to yourself as to why I am discussing a god in this lesson about a location, and that comes from the origin of this specific god. The Thunder Daddy was created by the hands and minds of the Rough Dwarves approximately 90 years ago. The creation of gods is not all that uncommon, however, this was no ascendance of a mortal being that had slowly become too powerful to exist on the prime material. This was not the telling of stories that got exacerbated over time, eventually turning into myths, and the figure in them into an all-powerful being. This was the creation of a capital G god, along with the likes of Tordim, or Ingur, or Mafalid, each of which were among those that created the planes. It is an understatement to say that this will never happen again, as it never should have happened in the first place. But what's done is done. Nothing can be done about it now. If you ask your parents, or possibly even grandparents, they would likely be able to tell you where they were when the Thunder Daddy was created, as for a week after he was created, torrential downpour occurred in all corners of the world, along with just as many lightning strikes as raindrops. The Thunder Daddy is also what granted the Rophf dwarves their resistance to both thunder and lightning. With that finished, this concludes our final lesson on the locations of Jeor'n-Dith. I have not decided what our next topic will be, and will leave that up to you. In the next coming week, I will post a poll to decide what topics we will cover next. Thank you for attending this batch of lectures. I hope you have learned at least one thing from this series, and I hope to see you again in my next class.